So I just want to start off with a brief story that the late American author David Foster Wallace told at a commencement speech. So there are these two young fish, and they're swimming along, and they happen to cross paths with an older fish swimming the other way. And the older fish turns to them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two younger fish, they continue on their way until one of them stops and turns to the other and says, "What the hell is water?" So this story is just meant to shed light on the fact that there are things in our lives that are all around us, like water is all around a goldfish, yet we may never even notice or acknowledge them. David Foster Wallace uses this story to highlight the fact that in adult life, their water is monotony, the day in, day out work experience. And when I heard this speech, I thought, okay, cool, I can understand that, I can see how that's true, but that doesn't really apply to me. That's not my water. So I got thinking, and I realized that my water, what encompasses my entire life, yet I may not even notice, acknowledge, or appreciate, is being a third culture kid, or a TCK. And before we go any further, I just want to get some definitions out of the way. So a TCK is someone who has grown up at the crossroads of two or more cultures and can't be defined under one ethnical label. They are the kids who were born in Hawaii but grew up in Belgium, Jakarta, and Singapore, and have a parent from Iowa and one from China. They're the kids who get umpaos during Chinese New Year and stockings during Christmas. And just to make this definition even more clear, a TCK is different from an international student. Take this for example. One of my best friends is heading off to college next year, and she's ethnically Indian, but she is way more New Yorker than she is Indian. And they've placed her in the international student community, thinking it'll foster a comfortable and familiar environment for her. But these other international students, they're Chinese students from China, they're French students from France. They aren't the TCKs she's used to interacting with. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, back to the fact that we hardly ever notice our TCK status or lifestyle. And I say we because here at SAS, all, if not most of us, are TCKs, but I know that, at least for me, I don't walk into my geometry class and realize that it could comprise a small United Nations. I don't walk into class and go, wow, well, aren't we so ethnically diverse today? I don't go, oh, look, there's a Chinese American, there's an Indian, there's an Australian Korean. No, I go, oh, look, there's Mikey, there's Sonia, there's Emma. Oh, look, I see my friends. So being a TCK has been such a central and defining part of many of our lives, yet we hardly ever notice it. It's our water. And this means that at times, we can forget that not everyone swims in our water. Take this for example. I was at a college information session about a year ago when a current student was talking about her experience with diversity. And she was talking about how crazy it was that she had a roommate all the way from Tennessee. And just how crazy this was for her, and how her and her crazy Tennessee roommate went down to the cafeteria and found a table with someone from California, someone from Pakistan, and someone from Vietnam, and just how surreal and fantastic this was. And I was just kind of sitting there confused, like, what? Because, I mean, a table with people from different countries, that's my cafeteria table. That's definitely a privilege I've taken for granted. But this girl who was so fascinated with having a roommate from Tennessee, she was a wake-up call for me and realizing that not everyone has the same experiences with diversity. And okay, well, I already knew that not everyone had the same diverse childhood that I've had, but realized that I was finding this out during a college information session. Next, well, actually, in about 2 weeks, the class of 2015, including myself, will be graduating and heading off to college soon. We'll be leaving these international waters. We'll be leaving our home waters and heading off into foreign waters. And I know that we're all going to have different experiences, but my first question is, how will we all stay afloat? With this in mind, I went around to my peers and asked them about their out-of-water experiences, what it's like when they leave this international community. And the first thing that became apparent was that we, as TCKs, we don't see color. We're aware of the ethnicity of those around us, but we don't let that define them. This sort of response can be different, however, when we leave these international waters. I go to the US to go to camp in the summer, and I remember on the first day of camp, we had to choose a buddy. And the way we chose a buddy was by all standing in a circle, us, the campers and counselors, and we put our heads down. And on the count of 3, we'd look up at the person we wanted to buddy with. And if they were looking back at us, if they were reciprocating, Then we'd break off from the group, buddy up. The group would get smaller, the circle would get smaller, and the process would repeat until everyone was partnered up. And I mean, you can tell this isn't going to end well for me, but anyway, we started the process, and it started off with a big circle, and then the circle got smaller and smaller and smaller until it was just me, 2 other campers, and 1 counselor. And at this point, I was just begging not to be the kid who had to sit with the teacher on the first day, not to be the kid who has to sit with the counselor on the bus. But anyway, we start, and we put our heads down, count to 3, look up. The other 2 campers are happily looking at each other. I'm dumbly staring at one of them, completely rejected, and the counselor is pitifully looking at me. And I kind of just realized that, well, I guess I am that kid. But I didn't realize why I had so much trouble making friends on this first day of camp until a couple days in. And by this point, all of the campmates, including myself, we were all really good friends. And we were having a conversation when my ethnicity gets brought up. And one girl says, "You know what, Justin? Like when I saw you on the first day, I was worried that you were going to be all weird and Asian. But you know, you're actually really cool." So of course I was taken aback because first off, backhanded compliment. Second off, weird and Asian, like suddenly they're synonyms. I just never expected my ethnicity would be the thing that held me back from making friends initially. This sort of discrimination based off of one's physical ethnicity doesn't just happen to non-white TCKs. It happens to white TCKs as well. So I asked some of my white friends what it's like when they head back to places like the US after living in Asia for so long. And one of them brought up how he has to face the repeated confusion, the same repeated confusion every time. People seem to have a problem with understanding that there is a difference from where you live and where you are ethnically from. They couldn't understand that he could live in Singapore for over 10 years, yet not consider himself to be Singaporean. And even after clearing up this miscommunication, they still referred to him as, "Oh, that Asian kid." And he's not even Asian at all. I mean, he's completely white, so there's clearly a miscommunication here. Another one of my friends pointed out how people in the US are familiar with the concept of Asian Americans, so Asians who have moved to America and have picked up Western values. But they aren't so familiar with the concept of American Asians, so Americans who have moved to Asia and picked up Asian values. So when you leave these international waters, our home water, there is a clear learning barrier. Not all TCK experience, however, end badly. A friend of mine goes back to Virginia in the summer to see her 2 cousins, and her 2 cousins are blonde hair, blue eyes, the typical look in that area, but she is Pakistani American. She's exotic to them. And whenever they go to the gym, her 2 cousins have to fill out a 30-day trial form or pay a cover charge. But all she has to do is walk in and she gets free entry because she's from some faraway land. She's exotic and she gets special treatment for this. So clearly there are some advantages to being a TCK. I mean, first off, unlike the girl from the college information session, we had the privilege of growing up surrounded by different ethnicities and different cultures. And being a TCK can even make you a little exotic at times. But what about disadvantages? Well, first off, we're constantly moving, and so are our friends, so we never really get to experience a consistent community. I mean, if you look at it, our lives are pretty chaotic. People come and go like seasons, and every time we move, we have to start from scratch. This lack of consistency means we lack the sense of stability that people like the girl from the college information session or other people who have grown up in one place their entire life have. And this is exactly what non-TCKs can teach us. They can teach us how to maintain a community within proximity. I mean, don't get me wrong, having friends across the globe is the greatest gift of being a TCK, but it can also be exhausting. We have to calculate time zones to find out whether to say good morning or good night, and most of our interaction happens through a computer screen. What non-TCKs can teach us is how to build friendships, how to build a community with those directly around us. We don't have to reach across the globe to find friendship. We can just reach for the hand right next to ours. So besides ethnicity, something else that we as TCKs don't see is religion. And especially when you grow up in a place like Singapore that has a plethora of religious holidays, when we learn the religion of a peer, it just becomes another fact about them. It doesn't become a defining label. But this sort of religious tolerance isn't always evident in other parts of the world. When she was little, a friend of mine used to sit next to the same girl, every day on the bus on her way to school. But after 9/11, her friend told her they couldn't sit together anymore because she was a Muslim. Of course, my friend was shocked and taken aback, and the first thing she asked her dad when she got home was, "Dad, what's a Muslim? Am I a Muslim?" She didn't even know what a Muslim was or if she was a Muslim, yet this girl had defined her as only that and nothing more, and discriminated her as only that and nothing more. This sort of religious tolerance we experience here in our international waters is a privilege that sometimes we may take for granted. Something else we may take for granted is something as simple as language. To us, being able to communicate with each other is it's natural. But as I went around asking my peers for stories, it became clear that the most popular stories, the most common stories, were stories about the cashier who was shocked at how good your English was, the campmate who asked you how you learned how to speak English, or the adult who was just completely surprised at your ability to speak English. And to us, these questions, these concerns seem ridiculous, but to other people, they're genuine, and that is not their fault at all. You can't fault someone for not having the privilege of having the same diverse childhood you've had. You can't fault someone for not having the privilege of growing up surrounded by different ethnicities and cultures. So these are just the stories of things that have happened and things that will happen when we leave our home waters and enter new foreign waters. And these new waters, they can be welcoming or livable, or they can be choppy, muddy, murky, even unfriendly. So what do we do when we enter foreign waters? What will I do next year as I leave Singapore and head off to college and leave behind these international waters? Well, I could swim with the tide and make things a lot simpler. You know when someone asks you how your day is going, and regardless if it's going amazing or terrible, you just reply, "Oh, it's fine"? Well, the TCK equivalent is when someone asks you where you're from, you just tell them something like, "Oh, I live in Singapore," and hide everything else about yourself. So I could take this method and keep it simple, or I could swim against the tide and constantly try and educate people on what a TCK is and who I am and what my background is by telling them that, well, I was born in Bangkok, but then we moved to Ohio, then New Jersey, then Ohio, but then Malaysia, then Singapore. Then after that, my parents are actually from the Philippines and Rochester. But the only thing I can guarantee with this method is that I will not make any friends. So what do we do? Well, we have to realize that at one point in time, we weren't TCKs. We were only familiar with our family's culture, or we only made these international waters our home in recent years. We had to learn to love different cultures and cherish the things that made us different. We learned that ethnicity was only skin deep, and that one's heritage has nothing to do with their ability to become a friend. We learned to remain patient in the face of ignorance and accepting in the face of something new. Without even realizing it, we became TCKs, and we learned to call this body of water we live in now our home. Now, I know I'm not really giving any clear-cut advice on how to live your life as a TCK, but that's because I don't think I need to. I'm certain that the skills we've gained in becoming TCKs will allow us to navigate any water. I just want to end on a quote by William Shedd. "A ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are made for. We feel safe within our home waters, but we are more than capable of breaking barriers and exploring others." Thank you.